And in retrospect, we think of them as part of the same great global conflict, whereas they were separated by 8 years.
Here's a historical blind spot. World War II and its buildup didn't happen all at once. The war in Asia began in 1937, Europe in 1939. What if today's Ukraine conflict is our version of 1937?
I wonder if you think of Ukraine today as 8 years down the line, or the things that could come, maybe not as a consequence, but at the same time as this, which could lead to another global situation. Do you think that it could cascade into something like that?
Of course, yeah, this is the problem.
Straightforward and chilling. Global conflicts don't start with one big bang, they cascade. A small war becomes a large one, especially in a world loaded with nukes.
With all of this, of course it could, and there are many people working to prevent this from happening. You see all of these meetings where our leaders are meeting with each other. If you get into some global war with people with nuclear weapons, when the losers decide that rather than losing, they're going to go for one more roll of the die, which is a nuclear weapon.
This line hits different. In a desperate moment, losing powers might choose apocalypse over surrender. That's not fantasy. It's history's pattern when unchecked ego meets firepower.
Then the question is whether the people below them will actually implement the order. When you think about low probability but high consequence events.
That's the scary part. Even if it's a 1% risk, the stakes are civilization ending. You only need to be wrong once.
I don't know what the probability is, but I know the consequences are huge.
And the probability is iterated over many years and decades.
You've got to always not use nuclear weapons, right? As that Pandora has already, the box has been opened, the nukes are there.
Especially if there's no retirement plan for Putin. One of the things that's interesting from your book, I think you mentioned this explicitly in the Wars in Asia, things that are seen by one side as we are deterring the other side, are often seen as the other side as a provocation.
Perception is power. A move that feels defensive to you can look like aggression to your enemy. This is how miscommunication starts wars.
Where, the embargoes from the US are seen as Japan as a deadline to attack. I think people who are, less sympathetic to the Ukrainian cause have said, well, extending NATO, which we thought would be deterrence, was actually a provocation for Putin. But what should we just generally make of that lesson?
First of all, I think you should look at the people living in the countries in question. So before we decide that we're the important people in the world, Americans, or we're in Britain now, or Britons, and therefore anyone in between doesn't count, I believe that's wrong. So all of the countries that joined NATO desperately wanted to join NATO, right? And they've had a whole history of Russians doing terrible things to them. I'm not making it up. This is what Russia's been up to. They have been correct that Russia is going to do more terrible things. They were correct doing everything they could to get into NATO and also be in the EU. And it's incredible. In my lifetime, I'm remembering standards of living of people in Eastern Europe that the Soviet Union had dominated and what it is now. Since they have been freed of Soviet domination, it's been massive compounding of standards of living. It's allowed people your age to travel the world, have aspirations in their lives.
There's no podcasting.
It's easy to forget. Freedoms like podcasting, travel, and choice aren't universal. They're earned and in many places still threatened.
But if when you talk about, should we deny these things because we got some egos in Russia?
This is the moral core. Should we give up on sovereign nations just to appease an imperial mindset? Where's the line between peace and appeasement?
That want to maintain a continental empire. Now, I cannot, or you cannot change how Russians think about things, right? The Russians have to, how they think about the things, that's their decision.
A perfect closer. Diplomacy is influence, but not control. Every nation must decide its own narrative. The danger is when their story demands someone else's tragedy.